welcome. Today we have JP Nicols with us to discuss using innovation to execute your strategic plans. JP is a leading voice for innovation, strategy, and leadership. He is the managing director of FinTech Forge, co-host of the popular Breaking Banks podcast, and an instructor with the Digital Banking School with the Graduate School of Banking at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. JP, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Great. All right. Well, let's get started. I really like how you talk about innovation, strategy, and leadership all in the same sentence. Let's get started with some quick definitions so we set the stage here. First, how are you using the word innovation?
Yeah, I mean, innovation is often conflated with things like technology and shiny objects. And if I were to ask 20 people for their definition of innovation, we might get 20 different answers. So the one that I use in the classroom and in the boardroom is a pretty simple one. And it's innovation is implementing new ideas that add value. I think everybody gets the new ideas part, but it's number one, the implementation. So just having the good idea isn't sufficient. I think many people have been a part of some session where you wrote down a whole bunch of cool ideas on a Post-it note, on a whiteboard, and then all too often, you kind of ask yourself a few months later, hey, whatever happened to any of those? And too often the answer is, well, nothing, right? It was a fun day. And then adding value is the other important thing. Now, this is the part where we'll start to leak into leadership a little bit already, because the leaders get to decide how you add value. So you might innovate around creating a better customer or member experience. You might innovate around taking costs out of the process. You might innovate around opening new markets or creating new products and services. So all of those are legitimate areas for innovation, but you just need to kind of think ahead about what is it that you're actually trying to accomplish and what kind of value are you trying to create for the organization?
Great, thank you. So what I'm hearing is you think of innovation more as a verb in action rather than a noun. And so with that, maybe we're getting to this a little bit. What do you mean by strategy? It's another one of these could be fuzzy words, but what do you mean about when you're speaking about strategy here?
Well, the work we do around strategy certainly leans on the work that Michael Porter has done around strategy for over 25 years now at Harvard. And it really stands in contrast to just operational excellence. And I often retell the Blockbuster story when we talk about this. Everybody knows about Blockbuster. It's kind of a well-worn metaphor for lack of innovation, but it's not really fair to just gloss over it. I mean, that was a great company with great leaders. And part of the problem was what led to their success was that they executed the predominant business model of video rental stores better than anybody else who was in that business. And Netflix didn't beat them at their own game. They changed the game. And so strategy has to be about creating and maintaining a maintainable differentiation between yourself and your competitors. And so innovation can be used to create that. And in our book, it's really critical that it is.
Great. Thank you. And then the last item in our trilogy here is you speak of leadership. So when you speak about leadership in this context, what is it that you're focused on?
Yeah, so I believe one of the most important roles of a leader is the allocation of what are always limited resources. Right. So not only budget, but time and managerial attention and bandwidth across the organization, both horizontally and vertically. All of these things are really challenged, and leaders have a lot of things that are pulling at them. And so whether you look at the Blockbuster or some of the other famous stories like Kodak, another great company, right? It's not that they didn't know about digital photography. In fact, they held some of the first patents on digital photography, but the leadership really couldn't steer the ship around to focus on those priorities. So if one of these new strategies is important, leaders really have to create that top-down direction so that people are focusing on the things that are take the company forward, not just defending and extending the core business, which is also important, but how do we create options for the future? And then how do we act on those options and actually build emerging new businesses? And so leadership is really involved across the organization, and they also need to facilitate the bottom up. Most innovative organizations are both top down and bottom up around innovation, but both of those come from leadership.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So with that understanding of innovation, strategy, and leadership, what is the best way for financial institutions to pull all this together?
Yeah, we have a process we call FIRE, and that stands for fast, iterative, responsive experiments.
Okay.
And so that is really a test and learn methodology so that we can go out and try these new things. I mentioned just a minute ago about defending and extending the core business while creating viable options for the future. And, innovation is easy. We just need to try a whole bunch of ideas, stop doing the ones that don't work, and double down on the ones that do. Well, but it's maybe not so easy, right? Because of all the things that we've talked about, all the challenges and the competing things that we have for our intention. So FIRE really allows you to break down big risks and big bets and big budgets into small incremental pieces so that you make progress and learn along the way. I often use a gambling analogy, right? Nobody sits down at the poker table and puts all their chips in before any cards are dealt. The cards are information and data. And that's what leaders really need to have. How can we get data that will help us make the right decisions, but we want to do it as quickly and cheaply as possible? So it's not about sitting around the big brown conference table and just thinking harder about what we think the future looks like. We've really got to get outside our four walls and test and learn through fast, iterative, responsive experiments.
Great, great. So with the FIRE process, I get the test and learn. So what is it financial institutions should be testing and learning? What aspects of all of this should they be testing and then taking those learnings and building on that?
Well, really anywhere that we've got uncertainty, but for instance, if it's you're replacing your core banking system, you probably don't want to do a whole lot of experimentation. You kind of know what the end point is, and this is one of the other things we talk about strategic planning. This is not a regulator's view of strategic plan where here's where you need to be and here's a time-bound action plan to get there. We often only know a cardinal direction and we're not necessarily sure of exactly all the steps to get there. The other thing I would say is it's really around customer desirability. What I see a lot in financial institutions is overweighting testing and learning around the technical feasibility. And unless you're doing something incredibly groundbreaking, it's probably technically feasible. And yes, it still needs to work, so you should still test it. But organizations need to spend a whole lot more time testing and learning around, are you solving a problem that your customers or members really care about? And are you solving it in the right way that creates the gains that they're trying to achieve and the pains they're trying to avoid?
Great, great. Wow, this is really great. Thank you, JP, for helping us understand the significant opportunities from using innovation, strategy, and leadership as an action-oriented process to create value for us and our customers. So that's great.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks.
Great. So in closing, thank you for joining us today. If you have additional questions for JP, please see the links in his bio.